What's good, y'all? It's your boy Def Finesse. Back at y'all with another TDF perspective.
It's to die for.
Alright, look. This video right here is gonna be dedicated to you, you African brothers. You brothers that are full-fledged Africans, like myself, and are growing up in the States, in America. Listen, the message of this video is simple. If you're African, you need to be proud to be African. You need to be proud of Africa. You need to be proud of your culture. You need to be proud of your tribe. You need to be proud of your heritage. Period. Okay? This channel is not for no bitch ass Africans. I'm just gonna be blunt. Okay? This channel is not for no bitch ass so-called black men either. Alright, if you African, you need to be proud. Don't let this society finesse you into believing that, your country, or not even just your country, but the entire continent that your country is on is completely impoverished, just nothing but just a bunch of 10 cents a day needing ass, low infrastructure having ass, water needing ass, food needing ass Africans. That is far from the truth. And for those of us Africans that have actually lived back home in our respective countries, we understand this firsthand. Okay? So naturally, being an African growing up in America is a completely different ball game. Okay, I'm not here to debate so-called Black Americans on whether or not being African in America is harder than being so-called Black men in America. I'm not interested in that. But what I will say is that being an African man growing up in America is a plight in of itself. Okay, that is worthy of being respected as its own trial, for lack of a better word. So yeah, for those of you guys that are in school, those of you Africans that are in school, you need to stand up for yourself. Okay, stop conforming. Don't conform to anything. You have your own culture, and the older you get, the more and more you're gonna realize that America. Not only does America not have an answer for astute so-called black men, that being so-called black men that can think for themselves, is what Malcolm called intellectual independence. Not only do Americans not have answers for so-called black men that are like that, Americans just don't have an answer for anybody that has a culture. This is why you don't see so-called white folks, really messing with Mexicans or really trying to infiltrate the different so-called Asian groups out here, or the different so-called Middle Eastern groups out here. Why is that? Because they have culture, very, very strong cultures that have existed before the inception of America. America only came into existence in what, 1777. You're talking about cultures that have existed since the 1500s. So yeah, we're gonna watch this video featuring our guy Akon, who is Senegalese. Please correct me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But yeah, he's Senegalese, and he grew up in America, but spent his childhood in Senegal. And the interviewer is gonna ask him an important question. She's gonna ask him, what does he consider himself to be? Because Akon, as you all know, he has an American accent, and he's an artist that popped off in America. And yeah, we're gonna look at his response to the question, and we're gonna peep the game, and I'm gonna just chime in here and there.
Akon, you're considered a first generation American. Your parents are African. You were born in the United States, but spent your early childhood in Senegal, and then moved back to the United States. What do you consider yourself today? Are you American?
Now hold on. You see what she did there? And I'm not going to attack this woman, because I don't believe she's being malicious. It just goes to show the lack of cultural understanding that many of them many demographics, mainly the so-called blacks and the so-called whites that they have. You know what I'm saying? It's a cultural thing. If both of your parents are are African, then nigga, you're African. You see what I'm saying? How can both of your parents be African, but then you say, no, I'm American? No, you can be, Americanized to a certain extent, but biologically you are African. You're still African. So let's just go back to when she asked that question.
I never want to be a president.
Akon, you're considered a first generation American. Your parents.
So that's the moniker that they want you to accept, that they want us to accept. First generation American. You see what I'm saying? That's the first step in deculturalizing us Africans.
Are African. You were born in the United States, but spent your early childhood in Senegal, and then moved back to the United States.
So she even acknowledges that he spent his early childhood in Senegal. You would think that would be enough for her to call him Senegalese. You see what I'm saying? Let's continue.
What do you consider yourself today? Are you American? Are you African? Are you African American? What are you?
I'm an African.
So are you American? Are you African? Are you African American? Now let's see. Let's hear his response.
African raised in America. Yeah. Clearly.
Consider yourself today? Are you American? Are you African? Are you African American? What are you?
I'm an African raised in America. Yeah. Clearly.
So you're not.
You see that? He said, I'm an African raised in America. Clearly. You see what I'm saying? That's it. That's all there is to it. That is it's literally as simple as that. If both of your parents are Ethiopian, nigga, you're Ethiopian. If both of your parents are Ugandan, nigga, you're Ugandan. Both of your parents are Sudanese, nigga, you're Sudanese. And so on and so forth. Stop letting these different demographics dictate to you what you are. Okay? Let me put it to you this way. If you call a Mexican Hispanic, look at the reaction you get. Call a Vietnamese man Chinese. Watch what happens. Everybody's gonna check you. Hey, he's Vietnamese. He's not Chinese, asshole. Everybody's gonna check you. Call some Koreans, Filipinos, see what happens. Call somebody from South America, Mexican, see what happens. Everybody's gonna check you. Why? Because nobody plays games with what? Their culture. Everybody that has a culture has that cultural understanding. Don't call a Chinese man Japanese. Don't call a Japanese man Korean. Don't call a Mexican man Venezuelan. Don't call a Venezuelan man Latino or Hispanic. You see what I'm saying? But Africans, us Africans, full-fledged Africans growing up in America, we are the only demographic that are expected to disregard our original monikers, that being, Ethiopian, Nigerian, Ugandan, Ghanaian, Liberian, or what have you. We're expected to disregard that and accept the moniker of black. Not even another race, but a color. You know what I'm saying? You Sudanese, full-fledged Sudanese, no mixed. You are full-fledged Sudanese, and they want to tell you, oh no, you're black. But yeah, let's continue.
Not American.
I wish I was, but my mind is not African. I mean American. It's clearly African.
But you have the accents.
You hear what she said there? And I know a lot of you guys can relate to that. But you had the accent. Okay, and if you take, I think Paul Mooney said this, if you take a zebra from Africa and you put it in Canada, that doesn't make that zebra Canadian. That zebra doesn't become a Canadian zebra. That's just an African zebra in Canada. The same logic applies here. But see, they try to finesse us, and I'm not talking about this lady specifically. Like I said earlier, this is just a lack of understanding of culture on her part. You know, to tell somebody that no, you're not African because you have an American accent, so you're black. This just goes to show your lack of cultural understanding. That's all. Or your lack of understanding of culture. Now watch how he responds. Let me rewind it just a little bit.
Are African. You were born in the United States, but spent your early childhood in Senegal, and then moved back to the United States. What do you consider yourself today? Are you American? Are you African? Are you African American? What are you?
I'm an African raised in America. You know, clearly.
So you're not American,
I wish I was, but my mind is not African. I mean American. It's clearly African.
but you have the accent. You have,
I went to school in America.
Uh-huh.
All my whole earlier childhood, I was raised in Africa. Then I came to America. Every summer, we would go back to Africa for a vacation, and then when I graduated,
Yeah, so he had it pretty good. I only went back to Africa when I was 7. So that was first grade. See, I went back to Africa only for first grade, and that was it. So he was going back every summer. And he really got an affinity for his culture, I would assume.
graduated high school, it was a choice whether we wanted to go to Africa or stay in the U.S. And just the opportunities in the U.S. was so much greater than Africa.
So for him to have been given a choice by his parents, I'm assuming then that his parents then had a very good understanding of the importance of Akon, and if he had siblings, Akon and his siblings, to know not only know their culture, but to choose whether or not they want to be fully immersed in their culture with their people, or to come out to America and just retain their culture. But either way, the parents understood the importance of their kids not only knowing their culture but really embodying it to a very high degree.
Well, you're certainly the perfect example of the American dream coming true.
Thank you.
Millions of Africans who make it to the States and who don't, have the same success and the same luck as you have. And what would be your advice to a young African who's immigrating to the United States today?
Well, I think this advice will go to any person migrating into the States. Ultimately, you can't change who you are. And I think the biggest obstacle is that when people come to the U.S., they kind of alienate their original personalities, way of lives, and they conform to what's there. And when you do that, first of all, you will never get accepted.
But
See what he said right there? You see? Akon, grown-ass man, understands this. Grown-ass African man. Grown-ass Senegalese man. And again, I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. I don't mean no disrespect. But even he understands it. He's a grown-ass man. So for us Africans, we need to peak the game. If you're African, period. It doesn't matter how many so-called black friends you have, you will never be one of them. And peep what he said at the very end. He said you will never be what? You will never be accepted. Okay? You will never be accepted until you truly embrace who you are. I'm not telling you young African brothers to, start wearing your African attire to your schools or whatever. I'm not saying do all that. I'm saying just understand your culture and have a great deal of genuine pride from it. Okay? Have a great genuine understanding for your culture and have a great genuine pride in your culture. That's all. As long as you do that, you will never get finessed, at least racially. Okay? Like I said earlier, there's no answer for the astute so-called black man in this country. Think about it. An astute so-called black man like Louis Farrakhan. White people don't have an answer for him. And this is just a so-called black man that is well-read, true to himself, puts himself first. They don't know what to do with him. So how much more us being Africans that have our own separate countries, our own tribes, our own separate lineages, our own separate cultures, our own separate histories. How much more? How are we getting finessed? Akon is right. We can't conform. Let me go back and let's go back and let's hear that answer again.
Be your advice to a young African who's immigrating to the United States today?
Well, I think this advice will go to any person migrating into the States. Ultimately, you can't change who you are. And I think the biggest obstacle is that when people come to the U.S., they kind of alienate their original personalities, way of lives, and they conform to what's there. And when you do that, first of all, you will never get accepted.
But isn't that the best way to integrate?
Absolutely not.
You hear what she said? Isn't that the best way to integrate? See, that's her mindset, and that's the mindset that a lot of, not just women have, but just a lot of first generation Americans have, and just a lot of Americans have that. Integrate, fit in. But me from personal experience, growing up in this country, dog, I remember I could never feel like I really belonged in those classrooms. Classroom where it was a so-called white woman that was running it, and she was giving preferential treatment to all the white kids in the classroom. Really, just all the kids except for the the darker so-called black kids and the Africans like myself. From an early age, I peeped that, and being able to go to first grade back home, and being in a Ghanaian classroom where you didn't have to deal with any racial elements, any racial dynamics. It was just all of you guys were the same. All of us were the same. We were all Ghanaians. We all spoke Tree. We were all just there to learn. It was just school. But then in America, it's like you can peep that people want you to believe that, hey, I see you as equal to me, and I see you as one of us. And they're saying this, but their actions aren't corresponding with what they're saying. So it's always this racial tension. When I was in school, all the way through high school, it was just a thought that I always had, and it never left my mind. I was never able to shake it. And it was that I just don't belong here. I don't belong here. I don't feel like conforming. I'm not going to conform to nothing.
First of all, you can't, it's no way you can move forward and you're not you. Like, one thing I do notice about America is that they respect other cultures. They actually admire other cultures very much. So when they can see the difference in who you are, their attitude towards you is completely different as well too. But if you're walking into me,
that's very true. I know a lot of you African brothers can relate to that. Those few times where you're not, engaged as a so-called black man, or assumed to be so-called black, or even if somebody just looks at you and just asks you, hey, where you from? And then you tell them, automatically they look at you different. So it's interesting because as Africans in this country, we really get the experience. We're really privy of what the perception of the so-called black man in this country is. You get what I'm saying? So it's like we really getting game. Like, that's what I'm saying. All you got to do is learn about your culture, have pride in it, and if you can, try to go and live there. But you do all that, and now you're comfortable in your skin, comfortable in who you are. Now you don't care if people assume that you're so-called black. So when they assume that you're so-called black and they interact with you the way they would interact with a so-called black man, you're getting the game. Okay, so this is how they feel about so-called black people or about so-called black men. And that's to me, that's middle school in a nutshell. I sat there, I let all them kids think that I was this cool ass black guy, and I allowed them, fire their little racial slurs, their little insults, the little jabs here and there, and it gave me perspective. Like, okay, this is how you guys truly feel. All right, bet. So as an African, I understand this shit. You see what I'm saying?
and I know you're a foreigner, but you're acting like an American. You just seem fake. It's not genuine. So the respect level is completely different. But if I walk up to you as an American and you're clearly an African or an Asian, that makes me more curious about who you are. I ask more questions. I'm now more, I'm more intuitive about what this is. I get more motivated to want to learn more about it. And then the respect level is different because now you're teaching me something.
But yeah, Akon, but let's be real though. Collectively, Americans, I mean, you have some Americans that are like that are naturally or genuinely inquisitive of different races and different cultures, but the majority of Americans have that mentality of white is right, America is right, and any other culture besides that is not only inferior to us, but they should cater to our philosophies. This is why you have the America is so present in the Middle East. They're trying to force the Middle Eastern men to completely change up the way they interact with their women. And then just the other different actions that they're trying to force them to change. Even in Africa, I got a couple of videos. Africans don't play that gay shit where they tried to use Obama to go out there to Africa and talk African presidents, grown African presidents, into accepting and promoting homosexuality in their countries. Now keep in mind, Africa, the many different cultures in Africa, I'll say, 100% of those cultures are against homosexuality. So that's very, very disrespectful for Americans to try to force that on Africans, just from a cultural aspect. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, what Akon is saying is true. There are some people that are going to be genuinely inquisitive and want to learn about your culture, but for you, young African brothers, y'all also got to understand that there's people that are just always going to look at you like, look, you got so-called black skin, so you're inferior to me. And that's definitely not the case in reality. But you just need to understand that that's the wavelength that a lot of people think on.
You follow?
So when you're in the States, you're proud to say you're African?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like this is a real question. You're proud to be African. You see what I'm saying? You can tell even her, she's been subjected to the negative propaganda on Africa.
Absolutely, clearly African.
You once told the Source magazine, and I want to quote this: "Black people in the U.S. can..."
But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop it right there. Yeah, that's the gist of this video. For you African brothers, you young African brothers, I know it can be hard. Sometimes, people will roast you, make fun of you, belittle you. They find out that you're African and they want to, ask you silly questions. Was there water in your country? Was there food? Were you hunting lions, tigers, bears? All these little silly questions. But you just have to understand where it's coming from. It's not really coming from a malicious place. They just hate Africans. But it's coming from a place of, it's coming from the fact that they've been misinformed, purposefully misinformed by this society. The society is always going to view the so-called black man as the threat, and I would say us, in regards to that, we're collateral damage. They don't even regard Africa, much less respect it. So they're just gonna try to throw us in the boat with blacks, so-called blacks, and just fuck us all over. This is why I gear this channel towards the so-called black man and us African men in this country. Not because I'm trying to get us to come together on some kumbaya shit, but it's just we literally have a similar plight, not the same plight, but we have a similar plight. So we can definitely peep the game, pass it to each other, and get each other's perspectives, and really build empires out here. And there's nothing that anybody can do about it, especially for us Africans. Like I said earlier, you can't finesse culture. You can't infiltrate culture. You see what I'm saying? You can't infiltrate America can't dictate anything to Mexicans. Mexicans run this shit. If there's any demographic outside of the so-called whites that's running shit in America, it's the Mexicans. Think about it. Mexicans have infiltrated and taken over entire industries, entire trades. Okay, even at ages as early as 16, 15, 16, 17. There's some jobs you go to, it'll be nothing but Mexicans. see what I'm saying? You're not about to dictate anything to them. Same with the so-called Asians, same with the so-called Middle Eastern people. So Africans, we just gotta catch up. We gotta get to their level. But when we decide we're gonna let people dictate to us, the way this lady really slyly, really subtly tried to dictate to Akon, no, you're American. When you let people do that to you, they're always gonna be in the lead. Because now they're telling you, okay, you're not Ethiopian, you're not Ugandan, you're not Sudanese, you're not Ghanaian, you're black. And this is how we see black people. So now you gotta have to play every little silly ass game that so-called black men are forced to play. So I'm looking at it like this. Look, if we're gonna be forced to play these little goofy ass games, at the very least know your culture. So that when you're playing the game, you're looking at it completely objectively. Whereas a so-called black man will probably look at it with more emotion. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, but that's it, man, because I'm going on and on. I'm trying not to make these videos too long, you feel me? But yeah, for you young African brothers out there, man, y'all stay strong. Y'all rep y'all's culture. Keep your head up. At the end of the day, no condition is permanent. You're not always going to be in the classroom and have to deal with little silly-ass questions, comments, jokes. You're not always going to have to work for another man and, in America's workplace and have to deal with, little silly race games. So just keep your head up, peep the game, and finesse accordingly. All right, I'm out.